Sometimes the greatest wars we fight are not against strangers, but against those we love. Ethan didn't know this yet, but the day he first introduced Raven to his parents, the battle lines had already been drawn. He had been nervous, of course. He knew his parents. John and Mariette were proud, traditional people. A lifetime of cautious choices had shaped their worldview. Tidy homes, respectable jobs, proper appearances. To them, appearance wasn't just personal taste. It was a declaration of values, of trustworthiness, of belonging. Ethan knew Raven didn't fit neatly into that box, but he believed, hoped, that once they talked to her, once they listened, they would understand what he saw. The meeting began politely enough. John shook Raven's hand too briefly. Mary smiled, but it was the kind of tight, polite smile that never reached the eyes. Raven, ever brave, smiled back warmly. She wore a black velvet dress with lace sleeves, her vivid purple hair tied up with a ribbon, a silver necklace shaped like a raven's wing around her neck. Ethan thought she looked radiant, brave and beautiful. His parents thought otherwise. The first comment came at dinner. "So you dye your hair that color on purpose?" Mary asked, slicing her chicken with a little too much force. Raven chuckled softly, not unkindly. "Yeah, I love expressing myself. Colors make me feel alive." John grunted, exchanging a glance with Mary. He said in that gruff way Ethan knew too well. The way that said, "This is a bad idea, but I'll tolerate it for now." As the evening wore on, Ethan noticed the subtle ways they distanced themselves. John rarely looked at Raven directly. Mary asked questions that sounded polite but were loaded. "Do you think you'll keep all those tattoos when you're older? Isn't it hard to get a job looking like that?" Raven handled it with grace, laughing softly, answering without defensiveness. Ethan's heart swelled with pride and a gnawing worry, because he could see it. They weren't even trying to understand her. They were just measuring her against a standard Raven had never agreed to in the first place. Later, alone in the car, Ethan squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry," he said, feeling the shame burning in his chest. Raven just smiled sadly. "It's okay. I get it." But it wasn't okay. That night, John and Mary called him. "You have to think about your future, Ethan," his father said bluntly. "She's not serious," Mary added. "You deserve someone who fits in, someone who won't embarrass you at company dinners, weddings, in front of your future children." Ethan felt his jaw clench. He tried to argue that Raven was brilliant, kind, more sincere than anyone he had ever known, that she volunteered at a local animal shelter, that she dreamed of becoming a counselor to help troubled teens. But they weren't listening. They only saw her surface and the purple hair, the tattoos, the piercings. And in their world, surface was everything. In the weeks that followed, Ethan lived between two worlds. When he was with Raven, everything felt easy, natural, alive. She told him stories about her childhood, how she grew up feeling like an outsider, how she found her strength in art, music, and the Gothic community that embraced individuality. Ethan loved hearing her dreams, of traveling the world, of building a home filled with warmth, of living boldly. But when he visited his parents alone, he felt himself shrink. They made comments, casual but sharp. Still with her? Still chasing rebellion? They made it clear choosing Raven meant disappointing them, and Ethan, the good son, had spent his whole life trying not to disappoint. He didn't realize it yet, but small cracks were already forming inside him. Cracks that would soon force him to make the hardest choice of his life. The pressure built quietly like steam behind a closed door. When he finally proposed to Raven, a small, tender moment under the old oak tree in the park where they had their first date, he didn't tell his parents right away. He told her first, of course, and she said yes with tears in her eyes, throwing her arms around him and laughing through her sobs. It was the happiest day of his life. And yet when it came time to tell John and Mary, his stomach twisted with dread. He didn't even finish the sentence before John cut him off. "You're making a mistake." Ethan tried to stay calm. He explained how much Raven meant to him, how much they had grown together, how she was home to him. Mary shook her head. "Love is blind," she said coldly, "and when it wears off, you'll see what you've done." The words stung, but Ethan realized something important that night. His love for Raven wasn't blind at all. It was the clearest, truest thing he had ever known. The wedding was small, intimate, not because they wanted it that way, but because it had to be. Ethan's parents didn't come. At first, there had been talks, arguments, accusations. John said he couldn't support a mistake. Mary cried on the phone saying she couldn't watch her son throw his life away. Ethan tried, he tried so hard, to bridge the gap. He invited them kindly, promised there would be nothing wild or inappropriate. He told them Raven was even planning to wear a simple, classic white dress, without tattoos showing, her hair dyed back to its natural chestnut brown. But it wasn't enough. It was never about the dress. It was about the fact that Raven had dared to be herself in front of them, and they could not forgive that. The day Ethan and Raven stood together under the open sky With just a handful of friends and Raven's younger brother to witness it, Ethan still looked out at the empty seats reserved for his parents. He had told himself it wouldn't hurt, but it did. It hurt more because Raven saw it too. She squeezed his hand a little tighter during the vows, as if trying to shield him from the ache. And somehow, even that, even in the middle of his heartbreak, made him love her more. Because Raven always saw the things he tried to hide. They moved into a small apartment above a bookstore in a different part of the city. It was dusty and cramped and needed work, but they filled it with secondhand furniture, their own art, music floating through the rooms at night. They built a life with their bare hands, and little by little, Raven changed, but not in the way Ethan's parents had predicted. She changed because she wanted to. She dyed her hair back to brown, laughing about how many showers it took to strip the purple out. She began dressing in softer colors, grays, muted blues, soft cottons instead of velvet and leather. She got a job tutoring art students. She even talked about maybe pursuing a master's degree someday. Ethan watched it happen without pushing, without demanding. He loved the version of her who had purple hair and tattoos. He loved this version too, because the heart inside her, the kindness, the fierce loyalty, the humor, none of that changed. And yet, John and Mary refused to see any of it. They visited once, reluctantly, after Raven sent them a handwritten letter, inviting them for dinner. It was a disaster. Mary sat stiffly, picking at her food. John stayed glued to his phone, barely participating. They asked no questions about Raven's new job. They didn't comment on the neatly arranged apartment, the photos on the wall showing vacations and hiking trips. Instead, they brought up old things, sharp-edged memories. "Remember when you showed up looking like you came from a Halloween party?" John joked, looking directly at Raven. "Do you still have all those rings in your face?" Mary added, laughing a little too loudly. It wasn't malicious, maybe, but it was cruel in its own way. The kind of cruelty that pretends to be harmless while cutting deep. Raven smiled through it, but Ethan could see her hands tremble slightly when she cleared the dishes. He felt anger rise in him like a fire he could barely control. He wanted to scream at them. "Can't you see how hard she's trying? Can't you see who she really is?" But he didn't. Not yet. After they left, Raven tried to laugh it off. "They're just stuck in their ways," she said. "Maybe it's not personal." But that night, as they lay in bed, Ethan felt her body shudder next to him. Silent tears. She thought he was asleep. She cried alone so he wouldn't feel guilty. That was the night something broke inside him. It wasn't a loud break. It was the soft, inevitable snapping of something that had been stretched too far for too long. He realized love was not enough to fix some people. He realized loyalty had limits when it demanded someone else's pain. And he realized that choosing Raven wasn't a betrayal of his parents. It was the only way to stay true to himself. He watched her sleeping face, so open, so trusting, even in pain, and made a silent promise. No more making her prove she was worthy. No more hoping they would see what he saw. No more letting their blindness hurt the woman he loved. In the morning, he would make a decision that would change everything. The decision wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a fiery explosion of anger. It was quieter than that. A cold, clean certainty settling into Ethan's bones like winter frost. He woke up before Raven that morning, made coffee, and stared out the kitchen window at the street below. It was empty, washed pale by the early light. For the first time in a long time, he felt a strange kind of peace. The peace that comes only after you stop lying to yourself. His parents would never change. Not because they were incapable of love, but because their love was conditional. It came with rules, expectations, standards that Raven had never signed up for. And if Ethan continued trying to earn their approval, he would drag Raven through a lifetime of quiet humiliations, small betrayals, endless explanations for who she used to be. He wouldn't ask that of her anymore. When Raven woke up, she found Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed, holding her hand. His voice was steady when he spoke. "I think it's time we stop waiting for them to come around." She blinked at him, groggy. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." He swallowed hard but didn't look away. "I mean, I'm done. I'm done making you feel like you're not enough. I'm done letting them hurt you. I'm done chasing something that isn't real anymore." She sat up slowly, searching his face for some hidden meaning, some loophole. But there was none. Only a fierce, unwavering tenderness. "You're my family now," Ethan said. "Not them. Not anyone else." For a moment, Raven just stared at him. And then she broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time she didn't turn away. She leaned into him, sobbing into his shoulder, her whole body shaking with the force of it. Not from sadness, but from relief. Because someone had finally chosen her without apology. Later that day, Ethan called his parents. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He spoke simply, factually, like closing the door to a house that had burned down long ago. "I love you," he said. "But I love Raven too. I won't let you treat her like she's less than. If you can't accept her, then you're choosing not to accept me." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're being ridiculous," John finally snapped. "This isn't about acceptance. It's about standards, about protecting you from a mistake." Ethan almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. "No," he said calmly. "It's about control, and I'm not a child anymore. You'll regret this," Mary said tearfully. "You'll come crawling back." "No," Ethan said, softer now. "I won't." He hung up before he could hear anymore. The next few weeks were hard, harder than he had imagined. There were days when guilt gnawed at him, when he wondered if he had been too harsh, too final. But every time he looked at Raven, working on her art projects, laughing with their friends, slipping her hand into his during late-night walks, he knew. He knew he had chosen right. They packed up their tiny apartment and moved to another city. A place where they weren't just Ethan and Raven, the ones with the difficult parents. A fresh start. They found an old duplex with ivy crawling up the walls, creaky wooden floors, and a garden in desperate need of love. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They painted the walls together, built mismatched furniture from flea markets, hung their wedding photo over the fireplace. They made new traditions. Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights under worn quilts, spontaneous road trips with no destination but each other. For the first time, Ethan lived without the weight of unspoken judgment pressing down on every choice he made. And for the first time, Raven bloomed without fear of who might be watching. Of course, there were moments when the past tugged at them. Birthdays came and went without calls. Holidays were quieter, lonelier. Sometimes Ethan wondered how his parents were doing, whether they missed him, whether they even thought about Raven at all, but he didn't reach out. Because love, real love, doesn't ask you to tear yourself in half to earn it. It doesn't demand that you make someone else small, just to fit into its idea of acceptable. Ethan hadn't abandoned his parents. They had abandoned the son who dared to choose love without conditions. And as he stood one evening in their little backyard, watching Raven string fairy lights between the trees, her face glowing in the soft dusk, he felt something deeper than happiness. He felt freedom. He walked over, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and whispered into her hair, "Thank you for waiting for me to catch up." Raven smiled. That smile that had first drawn him in, wild and free and alive, and turned to kiss him. "No," she whispered back. "Thank you for choosing me." And just like that, the old world slipped away, and the life they built together shone all the brighter for it. Time didn't race forward, it drifted, slow and steady, like sunlight through gauze curtains on a still morning. Months passed, then years. The sharp pain of Ethan's break with his family faded, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been accepted. It had been mourned properly, like a funeral for a bond that had once felt unbreakable. But Ethan no longer grieved it with bitterness. He had learned something far more valuable than how to fight. He had learned how to let go. Their new city wasn't extraordinary, but it felt right. It didn't care who they used to be. It didn't whisper judgments behind store counters or raise eyebrows in coffee shops. It let them exist. Raven found work at a youth center, teaching art to teenagers who carried pain on their backs like backpacks full of bricks. She didn't fix them. She didn't pretend she could. But she gave them space and brushes and a way to scream without making a sound. Sometimes she came home exhausted, sometimes radiant, but always fulfilled. Ethan, too, had grown in ways he never expected. He took a job as a project manager at a small software firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave him time. Time to cook with Raven, to read, to go for walks, and talk about dreams that didn't have deadlines. They planted a little garden in the back. Nothing fancy. Tomatoes, mint, some lavender. Watching it grow became a ritual, a quiet symbol of everything they were nurturing. But perhaps the most profound growth was inside them. Raven no longer apologized for her past. She started wearing rings again, not the big ones, not all at once, but here and there. A tiny silver hoop in her nose, a darker shade of lipstick on weekends. Ethan would catch her in the mirror smiling at herself like she had reclaimed something long buried. "You're glowing," he would say. She would shrug teasingly. "Must be the dirt under my nails from the garden." Ethan still missed his parents sometimes. He would lie if he said otherwise. He missed the smell of his mother's cinnamon rolls in December. He missed the way his father always insisted on double knotting his shoes, even as an adult. But every time he thought of them, it came with a quiet ache. Not guilt anymore, but a kind of wistful sadness, like missing a country you no longer have a passport for. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a simple card. On the front, a faded photo of a lake. Inside, just one sentence in Mary's handwriting. "Hope you're well." No apology, no questions. Just 5 neutral words suspended in years of silence. Ethan stared at the card for a long time. He didn't show it to Raven that night. He didn't tear it up either. He slid it into the back of his desk drawer and left it there, like a page he wasn't ready to reread. Because forgiveness is not a switch. It's a room with many doors and only one of them opens at a time. That summer, Raven painted a mural on the wall of the youth center. It was her idea, and hers alone. No committees, no supervision, just her and the teens who trusted her. When it was finished, the entire side of the building had come alive. Colors exploding from the concrete, a pair of hands reaching out, one from the shadows, one from light, meeting in the middle. When Ethan saw it for the first time, he just stared. "That's us, isn't it?" he asked softly. Raven smiled, sun in her hair, paint on her jeans. "It's everyone," she said. "But yeah, it's us too." They stood there for a long time, just watching. And Ethan realized something. The life they were building, it wasn't a reaction to pain. It was a response to love. Not love that demanded they change for others, but love that inspired them to become more themselves. A few months later, Ethan got promoted. Nothing flashy, just a bump in title and salary. But they celebrated anyway. Wine on the balcony, takeout from their favorite Indian place. Raven lit candles. Ethan put on a playlist of all the songs that reminded him of her. At one point, they sat in silence, their feet touching under the table, and Raven asked, "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Ethan didn't need her to explain. He knew she meant more than a place. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe, one day, but only if it's different. Not just them, us too. I don't want to go back to who I was when I needed their permission to love you." Raven reached across the table, took his hand. "You never needed permission." "I know," he said, "but it took me a while to believe it." The next morning, they went to the park, watched kids kick soccer balls, couples argue gently over coffee orders, dogs chase butterflies. It was an ordinary Sunday, but Ethan felt full. He looked over at Raven, sketchbook on her lap, eyebrows furrowed in concentration, and smiled. He didn't know what the future would hold. Maybe one day they would reconnect with his family. Maybe not. But he knew one thing. He had built a life from the inside out. Not from guilt or fear or obligation, but from love. And in a world full of noise and pressure and expectation, that was the most radical thing he could have done. Years later, when Ethan looked back, it wasn't the arguments he remembered most. Not the hurtful words, not the long silences, not even the moment he chose to walk away. He remembered Raven's laughter filling the rooms of their small house. He remembered the quiet mornings when she painted by the window, the sunlight catching in her hair, her brow furrowed in beautiful, stubborn concentration. He remembered the life they had built, ordinary and extraordinary in all the ways that mattered. The wounds his parents left never truly vanished. Sometimes, out of nowhere, a memory would sneak in. The sound of his father's voice, the smell of his mother's baking, and a sharp pang would catch in his chest. But it didn't last long anymore. Time, love, and the life he had chosen had softened the edges of that pain, the way the ocean smooths even the sharpest stones. Forgiveness wasn't something that had happened overnight. It wasn't one big moment of letting go. It was 1,000 small ones. It was choosing not to answer angry thoughts when they knocked. It was choosing to stay open-hearted, even when it would have been easier to close. Sometimes, when the nights grew long and quiet, Ethan still wondered, would they ever call? Would they ever say the words he once needed so desperately to hear? "We were wrong. We see you now. We see her." But even if those words never came, he realized, he was no longer waiting for them. He had found his peace without them. One evening, sitting on their back porch, Raven leaned her head against his shoulder and asked, "Do you ever miss them?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I miss the idea of them," he said softly, "not who they actually were." Raven nodded, her hand slipping into his. Above them, the stars stretched wide and full across the sky, vast and forgiving. And Ethan knew with a quiet certainty that he hadn't lost a family all those years ago. He had built a new one rooted not in expectations but in acceptance, not in appearances but in truth. Home isn't where you come from. It's who you choose and who chooses you back. And sitting there with Raven, surrounded by the life they had fought to build, Ethan knew he had chosen well, and he would choose her again, every single time.